All right, here we go. Okay, anybody? What? Thank you. So do you think we need to waste some time before we start? Anybody remember where we're up to?
Page 67 at the top.
We've got, I smell a bookmark. I smell a bookmark.
Why is that a problem?
Ay. Anybody recognize where we're up to?
He doesn't say it clearly. Say it in Hebrew letters.
No. That's fine.
Okay, we're at Ayin Lamed.
Is that what it says? I don't even know.
At the very top.
Oh, that, I don't know. I don't have the same book as you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yes, because we were just talking about the goof, the cloth versus the
Right,
cloth.
sorry.
Okay. Hey.
Wrong.
Okay. All right. All right, so recapping what we did last time, what I see everybody so clearly remembers, so I don't know if this is necessary, but just in case, what we talked about last time was that Hashem set up the world in a way that a person needs to be involved in their physical lives. There's no way around it. In order to do mitzvahs, we have to be able to live, and in order to live, we have to support our lives. So that means being involved in physical pursuits, because we need to eat, we need to drink, we need to have shelter, we need to have clothing, and we need to have money to fund all of that. So we need to work to get all the money to fund all those things. So it becomes a life of physical environment throughout. And that is the way Hashem designed the world, at least after the sin of Adam. At least after that point, the world is in a state of physicality, and people are in a state of physicality, meaning that we have to involve ourselves with our physical needs. Before the eating of the tree of knowledge, Adam and Chava had very little physical interaction that they needed. The food grew ready to eat from the ground. They could simply eat and be done. There was no, or perhaps almost no, physical draw, physical desire to do physical things. Physical, and anything that involves any of the senses, those were extremely minute and not much of an active player in a person's psyche. So that all changed drastically, and it kind of flipped almost. So today we're at a point where when we are born, we have no or little to no draw towards spirituality. Spiritual things are not things that tug at us the way physical things do. It's kind of the opposite of it was when man was created. So after eating from the tree of knowledge, that flip happened, and now the mission of mankind in the world remains the same, but it has to be gone at from a completely different angle. The objective remains to connect to Hashem. The objective remains to be spiritually elevated in every moment of our lives, but the way to get there, the path, is very different than it was. So what he's saying is that we have a life which is both within and without, physical predominantly, and the way to make that spiritual is through two methods, and those are what he called the gevulais, the boundaries, and the sidarim, the processes. And those are going to be what we're going to describe now. But just to remember, the goal of this is because these things are necessary to keep us on a spiritual path instead of the more natural path, so to speak, which would be the physical one. Okay, so that's really what we covered last time. Yes?
Were the boundaries and the restrictions, was a definition given before?
No. But he didn't say the word restrictions.
Boundaries and
Processes.
Did you say positive and negative mitzvahs, or?
We mentioned that, but he didn't say that yet. We mentioned that because we know the future, because we read ahead. But the question was, did he define them? And I said no, because he did not yet define them. Okay, are we good? All right, so let's go. Hey. Hasidarim v'hagavula se'ela. These processes and limits, boundaries, hine hem klal hamitzvahs. These are the mitzvahs. Ha'asin v'halav. The positives and the negatives. Meaning that the sidarim, the processes, the procedures, those are the positive mitzvahs, the mitzvahs that were things we are supposed to do. And the gevulas, the boundaries, are the negative mitzvahs, the mitzvahs, the things that we are supposed to not do. Asher kol achas mehen mechuvenes el tachlis haknes ba'adam v'hatzim bai achas madregas hamayla mitzvah zechar. Each one of these mitzvahs is designed to allow, I shouldn't say allow, each one of these mitzvahs will connect to and is related to and has the ability to accomplish that a person will attain and internalize one of the levels of spirituality and perfection that we've mentioned. Meaning, all the positive mitzvahs are there for us to, through them, reach perfection. And every mitzvah is with that design, and that's what it will accomplish. It will allow us, and it will be the venue or the method through which we grow spiritually. And the removal or the distancing from one of the elements of darkness and lacking that we've again discussed that take us away from Hashem. Through doing the positive mitzvah, or through the avoiding that which should be not done. So, simply put, we posed the dilemma. The dilemma is that we're trying to live spiritually, and yet we live in a very physical world in which we're forced to live physically. The answer to that dilemma is the Torah, the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs, the positives and the negatives, are the things that will allow us and guide us and be the vehicle through which we will grow spiritually and not be bound to our physical lives. Okay? Is this clear? Okay, so we continue. However, prata mitzvahs kulam, the specifics of the mitzvahs, v'chein prata kol mitzvah o mitzvah, and the specific of each particular mitzvah, meaning as a general, the concept of mitzvahs, and in a specific, each individual mitzvah, hine hem yusadim al amitas hamitziusai v'inyanai shel adam b'chol b'chinaisa. They are based on the true reality of the existence of man and all of the different aspects that make up a person. And the truth of all of the concepts and elements and aspects that are needed for a person to reach perfection. Kol davar b'tnav v'gvulav, every single thing with its limitations, its boundaries, all the criteria that are necessary for it, whatever it is that the person will need for his reaching perfection. V'amnam, however, hachachma ha'alyayna, the Hashem's wisdom, sheyadas kol zeh la'amitai, Hashem who knows all of this to the absolute truth, v'yadas kol inyanei habaruim kulam, and Hashem knows everything about all of the creations, v'shimushehem, and the things that they interact with, k'may shebarasam, as He created them, the He knows the truth in the deepest way possible of all of that. Hashkifa al-kos, Hashem looked at all of this, v'kol kol hamitzarach b'mitzvah shetzivana b'Torah, and He included every aspect of that process of reaching perfection for every one of the creatures that Hashem made, all in the Torah. What the Pasuk says, "Vayetzavenu Hashem la'aseh," says kol hachukim, and Hashem commanded us to do all of His statutes, la'toiv lanu, to be good for us. Okay, So what he has said over here is a very important concept. And that is that the mitzvahs are here in order to be the path on which we will grow. Without this path, we will not grow. And on this path, the only thing we can do is grow. So if a person keeps all of the mitzvahs, meaning the positives and the negatives, they will only be striving in the direction of spirituality, and they will not be exercising their connection to the physicality, and that's the goal. So Hashem, who knows, obviously, all of the details and all of the different elements that a person goes through in life, whether it's their background, whether it's the circumstance they find themselves in, it's their mental capacity, it's their physical capacity, it's their surroundings, it's their upbringing, it's their education, it's their interactions with other people, all the different things that all come together to make up what we call a life. All of that is clear to Hashem, obviously, and the mitzvahs are designed for each and every person to live that life and be able to grow spiritually and move away from the physicality. That's what the mitzvahs are designed for. And the mitzvahs are not misappropriated. Every single mitzvah is given to the right people at the right time for the right in the right circumstances. So if a person will say to himself, oh, well, why isn't this a mitzvah? Or why is that a mitzvah? They have to realize that Hashem knows better. Hashem knows what is necessary for your growth, and Hashem knows what is necessary to keep you from becoming too attached to your physical needs. And that's how he designed the mitzvahs. So a very common theme in other circles is that women want to do men's mitzvahs. That's a terrible mistake, because Hashem understands who's who and who needs what, and he made everybody the way they need to be and gave them the mitzvahs they need to have for their growth. Getting involved in someone else's mitzvahs would be the equivalent of taking someone else's medication. If you're not a doctor, that's not a good idea, because what you're taking could be very detrimental to your health. So when Hashem gave a Kohen his mitzvahs, and a Levi his mitzvahs, a Yisrael his mitzvahs, a man his mitzvahs, a woman her mitzvahs, that was by design. That each neshama needs certain things, and the mitzvahs that are given are there to promote that. And there is no other way. That's the only way. So trying to ask yourself, well, I want to do someone else's mitzvah, that's a problem. And essentially that was Korach's mistake. Korach wanted to be a Kohen, even though he wasn't chosen to be a Kohen. And this was his mistake. He thought, I could be on that level. And the answer was, no, you can't. Hashem chose Aaron to be on that level and not you. You have your mitzvahs. He has his mitzvahs. Hashem didn't choose Moshe to be a Kohen. Hashem chose Aaron to be a Kohen, right? Even though Moshe had his greatness, but Aaron had his. So every neshama has exactly what it needs with the mitzvahs that are given, and a person needs to make sure that they do those mitzvahs in order to grow. So if the bottom line is, when we ask ourselves the original question, how do we solve the dilemma of being stuck in a physical world, needing to be involved in physical pursuits, and still grow spiritually? The answer is the mitzvahs. Stick to the mitzvahs. You do the mitzvahs, you're going to be growing. You avoid the mitzvahs, you're going to avoid growing, and on the contrary, you'll end up going in the wrong direction. Okay, any comments or questions? Y'all have been way too quiet.
I have two. One, you can totally dodge if you want, because it's a larger conversation.
Okay, go for it.
So when you talk about mitzvahs that are specific by man or woman, are we talking man or woman by gender or biological sex? Like I said, you can dodge this one.
Your question is, what happens if someone decides to change? Is that your question?
And or if they don't really associate with either.
Their association has nothing to do with it. It has to do with their neshama.
Okay.
And to say that someone's body that Hashem created and their neshama aren't in line is saying Hashem made a mistake. Okay. So we're not going there.
Okay, fair. We can talk about that later.
I thought that did it. Never mind. Okay, go ahead.
The Gemara talks about androgyny, and it's in the Gemara.
Well, that's someone who's got both. That's a different story.
Okay.
That's someone who has both elements, and and you're right. And the Gemara has one opinion.
Non-binary?
Yeah.
What about non-binary?
Right, which doesn't exist.
And like I said, we don't have to get into it here, because I realize that that's a wormhole. We could go down.
Okay.
Talk for hours about.
All right,
But,
go ahead.
The second one is if,
You said you could talk for hours about
I
it,
could.
and I said, not me.
I could, because I interact with people all the time that,
I
like,
think it's a great, I think.
yeah, like, yeah, we could have a separate talk. So,
All right.
the second one is, if Hashem has already kind of chosen which mitzvahs are going to be important to us, when we get to a point where we might be observing a mitzvah, and then all of a sudden, or maybe not all of a sudden, but over time, realize that it doesn't necessarily fit, or like we're not as attached to it as
Okay.
like other ones.
Okay.
Knowing that there's no sense of like punishment for not doing them.
Wait,
Okay,
wait,
so
what?
am I-
How do you know that?
How do I know what?
That there's no punishment for not doing
Because
them?
we're
Not in the realm of punishment here.
No,
We're
no, I
talking about
understand
growth versus
Exactly,
going the wrong
because-
direction.
Because the idea of the more, right, so the more mitzvahs you take, it's about that connection,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like, oh, if you don't do this, you're gonna get struck by lightning. Okay. So.
Well, there's that too, but.
Well, yeah, but again, let's think about this simplistically.
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
I guess my question is, if someone adopts certain mitzvahs, and then they decide over time that it's not something that is like either bringing them any sort of connection, bringing them any sort of joy or anything, like, clearly I know there are things we do just because we are told to do them, fine. When we decide to not do them anymore, if that's what we decide, is that something that Hashem already knows we're going to do, or is that the Yitzhar?
Yes and yes. No, they're both true. Of course Hashem
Yeah.
knows what you're going to do.
Right.
But of course it's the Yetzer Hara.
Okay.
That's like someone who the doctor prescribes in medicine and the guy feels like, well, I don't think I need this anymore and stops taking it.
Right.
Well, for the people around them, they're going to start noticing a change in that person. And they're going to realize, that, hey, there's something wrong. You forgot to take your medication.
Mm-hmm.
And
When
then,
they actually need it, though.
well, if the doctor is the expert,
Yes.
and he knows that this person needs it,
Okay.
so the person trusting themselves over the expert doctor is a mistake.
Okay.
Right? So assuming that the doctor has absolute knowledge, which again, in the metaphor we're talking about Hashem here, so of course Hashem has absolute knowledge. So Hashem knows that this is the medicine that you need. If you don't take it, then you're saying, I know better than the expert doctor. And then even if you think that you're okay, unfortunately anybody who works in mental health will be able to tell you that a lot of people who need medication think they're okay. Right? And they're very not. Right? So
Right.
that's the same thing with mitzvah. So a person to say, well, I don't feel connected to this mitzvah, I don't feel like I'm growing through this mitzvah, that means you think you know better than Hashem, which is what we're saying here. Hashem said, these are the things you need to grow spiritually. Without them, you're not going to, and you're going to go the other direction. So for you to say otherwise is saying you know better than Hashem, which is not a smart way to live. So even if you don't feel it, you have plenty of people who go on medication, they're on it for years, and then they're kind of like, okay, I don't think I need this anymore. And then they don't feel the difference, and then a month later, their spouses are sending them back to the doctor because they can't handle it, right?
Yeah.
So even though the person themselves doesn't realize it, that doesn't mean it's not making a change. So Hashem gave us the mitzvahs. It's the same thing. Hashem said, this is what you need. I told you this is what you need. I know what I'm talking about. You just got to trust me.
So that's including, so it is the ones that are listed for us to do versus the ones that we've chosen to take up.
When you say we've chosen, you mean we as a people or
No,
we as
no,
individuals?
Individually, we're all on a separate journey. We're trying to add, particularly those of us that didn't grow up this way, right? So there's a lot of things that just don't come naturally to us,
Mm-hmm.
or we require more explanation, or we may do it,
Okay.
but then not feel that kind of that exchange, that connection.
Right.
So how do we know that was the right thing for us to, if we take one on,
Uh-huh.
how do we know that was the right one to take on?
There is no right, well, let me rephrase that. There's no wrong one to take out. Because Hashem gave you and you and you and you, everyone, all the mitzvahs. So there is no wrong one. If a person needs a diet that consists of 15 elements in their diet, so if they choose 3 out of the 15, I mean, that's great. but and there's nothing wrong with choosing these 3 over those 3, but the goal is to get all 15 are what you need. So get to all 15. Now, if you feel like, well, I don't need this one element, so again, you're saying you know better than the doctor, which has got to be a mistake because the doctor has absolute knowledge in this case, right? So there's no such thing as having chosen the wrong one. It's impossible. There is no wrong one.
Unless you're a woman choosing to do something that a male is only getting.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but we're talking about ones that from the proper list. To pick one that you feel you're not connecting with doesn't mean it's a wrong one.
Yeah,
It means you're not connecting with it.
but I still have to do it anyway.
Absolutely. For your good.
But I didn't know that there, like, sort of a connection or a resonance is part of the equation.
It's not something you'll necessarily feel. It's something that your neshama will experience, no different than a person who has a diet. You won't necessarily feel his iron deficiency, but it's going to be there, and then one day it's going to come to bite him when he has no energy or has blah blah or whatever. It's not something you're necessarily going to feel as you're going through your day.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with mitzvahs. You can't assume that every single mitzvah is going to just make me feel elevated and energized like a
I feel like I
a
want
cup of
that.
coffee.
That would be nice.
That would be
Yeah, right?
that would be amazing.
It's reassuring, you know? We need some positive, positive feedback.
Yeah.
And sometimes, well, isn't it, like, the reference to the ladder
Mhm.
that in our, life, we are either going up the ladder or down the ladder, that there's actually no plateau, because if you're at the plateau, you're going down. So, like, for the example, well, for what Jody was saying about many of us who, didn't grow up with all this, so we take things on along the way, you'd be either going up the ladder or down. I mean, I know all Jews are, but in particular, if we're taking something on, it would be important for us staying on the ladder going up.
Yes, the direction is always the key, for sure. I like to think of the metaphor more of riding a bike uphill. Or downhill, for that matter. I mean, climbing a ladder, you can stop and take a break. If you're riding a bike uphill, you can't stop and take a break.
So are we riding a bike or are we climbing a ladder?
I would say that they're both true, but in different aspects. The climbing the ladder is the metaphor that Yaakov was shown in his dream to teach us how to grow, and that is step by step. It says it went from the ground, its top reached the heavens, and it was one step at a time. Right? You don't climb a ladder by moving both your feet at once or both of your hands at once. That's not a good idea, right? It's one hand, one foot, other foot. That's how you do it. One little quarter step at a time. That's how you climb a ladder. As far as the growth scale, though, the wave, that's a constant. That's not the ladder. That's the bike. That's the hill. You're either going up or down. There is no staying stagnant. It doesn't work. There's no such thing. Just ask an EKG.
If I could just point out, just because I think it's very interesting that we don't have to get into the non-binary discussion, but at least in my limited understanding, a lot of what Kabbalah goes into and a lot of what real deep Jewish spirituality is about is based on masculine and feminine principles, and we tend to blur that in our society. But even the language is Zachar and Teva. Even the language is masculine and feminine. And as you go further into this, you're gonna find, and this is what kind of will begin to shape you. That understanding is there are masculine and feminine principles, even with regard to Hashem. It's all one, but we have to respect the fact that there are. If you can't. I truly don't understand at this point how, and it's being open-minded, because I think the non-binary conversation is great, but even people who are non-binary, that's perfectly fine, but if they're going to study spirituality from the sages and stay on course, you have to connect with their masculine and feminine. It doesn't necessarily mean gender, but it certainly indicates that there is a giver and there's a receiver. Right? There's a kli, which is the vessel, and then there's going to be the light, which pours itself into the vessel, and that's how the world is sustained, and that's how the language is sustained, and that's how humanity is sustained, and that's how existence is sustained. I don't understand it in totality, but there is a reality here, and you can't go further into deeper Jewish mysticism or any spirituality without understanding in Judaism that there is this masculine feminine interplay, and there is, and if you can go back as far as you want, you're going to find it in the Sefer Yetzirah, and it goes on. There's always masculine feminine.
Is that
interplay.
something you've been through?
No,
Oh, okay.
I've looked at it
Just
in
curious.
English. As a Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, I'm not saying I understand it, but I mean there is an interplay there that in the Arizal talks about it. It's inescapable. We have to come to terms with it. But I do think the non-binary discussion is amazing, and I think it's something to talk about. But that is a very modernized
Yeah. Well,
thing, which can be even somebody who's non-binary who wants to study is going to have to capitulate to there are masculine and feminine principles.
Exactly.
You know, regardless of my gender or what I identify with or my fluidity, I have to understand there's masculine and feminine principles for me to connect to this and move forward.
Yeah,
You know
and
what I
like
mean?
I said, I haven't had any interaction with anybody who is like wanting to study or get like it's mostly interaction that I have with students or people who are not necessarily studying what we're studying or like that. But it's an interesting topic on that end, mostly when I talk with them about the separation of mitzvos between like what what the men do, and they see it as misogynistic.
Right.
I'm like, no, it's not.
It's
And
truly
so
not.
you
You
have
have to
that
understand the
conversation.
spiritual pipelines,
Exactly.
and how they work and interplay. It's not misogynistic at all. This is the shortish. These are the roots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that I will never like
Right,
like I said, I have no problem with that. It's when that conversation